Hi everyone, this is Raju. In last video we have covered what is the Spring Boot application and how to create a simple Spring Boot application. Today I am going to cover the 5 topics like how Spring Boot application run, how to create a simple RESTful service, comparing a Spring Boot with a traditional Spring MVC, starter dependency, how to change server from Tomcat to Jetty. Okay. Hi all, please subscribe my channel, follow and share with everyone. Okay, let's start how Spring Boot application run. So we have a Spring Boot application uh, with called simple Spring Boot demo, which we created last time. So here we have a main class called simple Spring Boot demo application. So inside we have a main method. So this is the entry point for starting the application. So here we have a Spring Boot Spring application dot run, which is taking a Spring Boot class and args as a argument, which actually when we run this method, so it actually creates the application context and it starts the embedded Tomcat server, and it automatically configures, imports, scan all the components whatever we defined in the application, and deploys this application in a embedded Tomcat server. So how all the components are scanned and how beans are created, how these are injected in Spring IOC container, and how the application is deployed in a embedded Tomcat server, that we are going to uh, you know discuss. So we can see, right, at the rate Spring Boot application annotation. So it has internally 3 annotation. Let's go inside this. Okay, so it has enable auto configuration, component scan and configuration. These 3 annotations will actually contribute great in starting the application. How these contribute starting the application, I will tell you. So what does configuration annotation? So configuration annotation, it actually mark all the beans defined uh, in the application, and which registers all the instantiate all those beans and registers all those beans in a application context. Let's take an example. Let's consider app config as a class annotated with configuration at the rate configuration. So inside this one we have a bean defined called some bean. Some bean is a class which provides some implementation. So when we define a bean inside a app config class, which what annotation configuration will do is it instantiate all the beans defined in this class and registers all these beans into application context. Okay, so let's go to next annotation, component scan. So what component scan does? So you have a controller class, REST service class, repository class, all the classes created in the application, right? So to all to scan all those components, so we need a component scan. So whatever components we defined under a package, let's say Spring Boot application is created under a package com.example.demo. So whatever components comes under this package or sub package, so all are scanned by the component scan. Okay, let's go to enable auto configuration annotation. So what this annotation will do, so it enables all the configurations whenever it finds a dependency on class path. Let's take an example. So to build a web application, we need to add a Spring Boot starter web dependency in the pom.xml. So in typical Spring MVC application, we have to configure application context, web.xml, all this configuration we have to do. We have to add many dependencies. Okay, so but here in Spring Boot application we don't have to add any add any XML configuration. Only we have to add a starter dependency. So when Spring Boot finds this dependency in the class path, right, so it auto configure everything. All the configurations are enabled by default when it finds this dependency. So we can build a web application easily. No need to have any configuration in this Spring Boot application. So when it when we add this starter web, right, it, if you see, it has downloaded downloaded all Spring related dependencies, so that it is, you can see Spring MVC dependency, Spring JDBC, all these dependencies are downloaded, so which enables Spring Boot application to develop a web application. Okay, let's go to next topic, creating a simple restful service. Okay, before that one, so we have covered 3 annotations. In the Spring Boot application. So this is how it scans all those components and instantiate all the beans and register when the application context is created, register all those beans in the application context and start the application and deploy this all these application in a embedded Tomcat server. So Tomcat is a default server, so which is embedded already in the Spring Boot. We don't have to install and deploy this all these jar manually in a Tomcat. So when we run this application, it automatically do all these things. Okay, so creating a simple RESTful service. So to create a simple RESTful service, we are going to create a controller and service class. So from controller we call the service class and get the response. So let's copy the code. So we have a controller called simple controller annotated with rest controller. We have a get method with a mapping hello. So with a method hello, so let's create a service class. Okay, let's copy the code. We have a interface called message service, so which has a get message method. Here we have created a message service IMPL which implements the message service interface and override this message get message method and provide a implementation. So here we are returning hello from message service. Okay, let's call this message service IMPL from controller. So to call the service, we have to auto wire that service. So this is how we do dependency injection in Spring Boot application. Let's use message service to call the method get message which returns the message called hello from message service. Okay, so we have configured controller and service IMPL and okay, so let's start the so we have created a controller service class. So controller is calling service class to get the response. Okay, so we will start the application. So application is started. You can see Tomcat started on 8080 port. Okay, by default application takes 8080 as a port. Okay, let's test how this application works. So from browser we can test. Localhost 8080, so we have to pass a path is hello. You can see hello from message service, so we are getting the response. Okay, so this is how we create a simple restful service in a Spring Boot application. So in later on videos I will show you how to connect to database and all. Okay, so let's cover third topic, comparing a Spring Boot with traditional Spring MVC. So in case of Spring MVC, to create a Spring Boot application, what all we need? So we need to include Spring MVC dependency, Java X Servlet API, and other additional required libraries, and we have to create a web.xml file. So this is servlet mapping file, right? So where we can specify application context XML. So application context XML file we have to create. So here we will define all the configurations and all the beans, right? So this is all XML configuration we have to do in a Spring MVC. In case of dependency also, we have to do all the configurations in XML file, right? But in case of Spring Boot MVC, we don't need any XML configuration. We just have to include a dependency called starter web to develop a web application. So for dependency, in case of you are connecting to database, so we need to include a starter data JPA as a dependency, which actually connects to JPA, Hibernate, JDBC. Okay, this is how Spring Boot is compared with traditional Spring MVC. This is the main difference. In Spring MVC, we have to configure and do the setup. This is that takes no manual configuration, lot of time. But in case of Spring Boot, it's easy. It reduces lot of time for a developer to develop any web application. It just, if you can see, when we include a Spring Boot starter web dependency, which actually it downloaded all the required dependencies like Spring MVC, all the Spring related dependency under Maven dependency. So which helps the Spring Boot to enable all the configuration internally. We don't have to do any configuration. Let's say in case of when we want to make a database connection, we include a Spring Boot data JPA as a dependency. So which enables data source automatically in the Spring Boot application. So in the application properties, we just have to mention URL, database username, password. These are the configuration we have to add in the application property to actually connect to a database. This is very easier compared to Spring MVC. This is how it enables all the configurations related to data, Spring Boot data and connecting to the database. Okay. There are many other differences, but this is the main difference, how actually the Spring Boot is more for better when it comes to reducing the time for the development of an application, or which helps testing the application easily, and which reduces a lot of boilerplate code. We don't have to include lot of configuration in Spring Boot application. So starter dependencies. So next topic. So what are starter dependencies? starter dependency are like, one dependency which has collective more than one dependencies. Like if you can see here, starter web, this is one of the starter dependency which internally provides the functionality to create a web application. For creating a web application in Spring MVC, we need lot of dependencies, right? So Spring Web MVC, Java Servlet API, so many other libraries. But to in this Spring Boot application, if we add just one starter dependency which provides collective functionality of all those dependency, and Spring Boot application enable all the configuration. You don't have to add all those dependency in pom.xml. So there is another starter dependency called Spring Boot starter test. So using this dependency, we can do multiple like integration test, unit testing. We have another starter dependency like starter data API. So that is one of the starter dependency where it includes the connection mapping of like Hibernate, JDBC, JPA to connect to any database. We can we don't need to do any data source configuration for connecting any database. Okay. So the last topic is how to change server from Tomcat to Jetty. By default, you can see here Tomcat started on port 8080. So application is deployed in Tomcat. This Tomcat is embedded inside a Spring Boot. Okay. So it's not like we have to, we can use only Tomcat. We can use other server also like Jetty. So how to use Jetty instead of Tomcat? So I will show you how to do that one. Copy this code. You can see here we are excluding the Tomcat here and we are adding the Jetty dependency. So it will not deploy the application in Tomcat, it will deploy the application in Jetty. So let's run this application now. So it is already running. So let's stop this one. So we terminated. We will close all the running application. So let's run from beginning. You can see here Jetty started. Instead of instead of Tomcat, it now deployed in Jetty server. You can see port 8080. Spring Boot application started. Okay. So now the application is running in Jetty server. This is how we can deploy our application other than Tomcat like Jetty. Okay, thank you and all everyone.